what I want to do is talk about this very precise moment. Friday, we got important news that, about the state of social media. And I think we're in a position to see that social media is not going to get the job done, the marketing, advertising job done. So I want to make that argument very briefly. Then I want to show you a spot from Volvo, which is, I think, state-of-the-art stuff and gives me a chance to show what traditional advertising, the 30-second spot, can do, that social media has a difficult time doing. Then I'm going to roll out my model of advertising, kind of an anthropological model of what advertising is, and then I'll suggest that these are the basics to which we want to return. So on this first point, just Friday we learned that Diet Coke had overtaken Diet Pepsi, and I think we can probably argue, within certain limits, and this would be an interesting conversation all on its own, but this might be the outcome of Pepsi's decision to go with social media and not to advertising in a traditional way at the Super Bowl. The refresh campaign, of course, was for Pepsi an attempt to do social good. It was admirable in every way. It was, had a kind of social media aspect to it, but it looks as if it didn't get the job done. Secondly, the Ford Fiesta movement, of which I'm a huge fan, and I wrote it up in the Harvard Business Review with real enthusiasm. I should just let you know, when I criticize social media, it's not because I harbor any hostility for the notion. In fact, I think it's superbly interesting and useful stuff, and my group at MIT is all about social media. So my criticism here is not, it comes from no kind of deeper hostility. It's just, what does the evidence tell us? And the evidence, I think, says that Fiesta movement campaign that Ford did, which was so brilliantly conceived and executed, isn't selling more Fiestas. So some of the evidence is coming in, and I think it tells us several things, but most importantly, it tells us that social media can't do what traditional advertising has done so brilliantly. That if we're going to use them, we have to use them in tandem. That we have to divide the labor across social media, new media, and old media. So I want to show you this spot. I could have chosen anything at random. I could have used the IMPC spot that Chuck just showed, but what I want to do is show you this spot that ran, I don't know, about 3 years ago. And I'm hoping all of you have seen it at least once, and so that we can just run it a single time and you'll get a sense of this, almost chosen at random, an ad for Volvo.
They were really good, and they lived in the house that he likes the most. But one day he wanted to change the color of him. Just a pretend stick, but it's really thin. And it has legs, and I don't know what it is. And just worms and some bugs. Mom talked about it, but his head is so tiny that.
Who would you give a Volvo to? Tell us at volvocars.us.
Wow. How sweet, how achingly sweet, right? This is the stuff that pours through our lives, and it's the stuff we wish we could have recovered 20 years after the fact. That moment will define for the father what his relationship was with that daughter. So, and it turns out that the agency in question captured that dialogue, the little girl's chattering away in the back seat. I think her name is Risa Mickelberg, was the copywriter, and she followed a chatterbox around for a day with a tape recorder and listened to this little girl just throw off all the nonsense that a little girl throws off, and built that into the campaign. For certain strategic purposes, this is almost all noise, right? It took somebody in the agency to say, wait a second, this could be useful. And that's what an anthropological model, I think, does for us, is deliver how it is and why it is a little girl chattering in the back seat is so powerful as a way of building the brand. So this is Euro RSCG. It's taking we can guess that Volvo said, listen, when the agency goes to the client says we stand for safety. That's the big brand promise. That's our differentiation. That's the value we deliver to consumers. And in fact, the first work I ever did was in Detroit for Jeep. And the agency guy ran up to me and grabbed me by the lapels and said, I'm so grateful you're here. Somebody who wants to talk about the real deliverable of a Jeep. If I let the client do it, the client will force me to talk about turning ratios in every spot. And I know Jeep is about, there's lots more to the proposition. So here we see the agency saying, well, how do we make safety live? That's an interesting proposition. Everybody believes in safety. It's a motherhood issue. If you talk about it in a very general, abstract way, it's hard to make it compelling. It's hard to get people to buy cars just on the grounds of safety. But when you make this issue live in the form of a little girl chattering in the back seat of the car with her dad and driving her, the Volvo, through a rainy Saturday afternoon, we get some sense of what the point of safety is. It's when we see how safety matters that we begin to care about. We begin to believe that safety matters. My point here is that we cannot create this meaning for the brand using social media. I mean, these are early days, right? We're all trying to figure out how social media works, and I could be wrong. But believe me, I've looked at lots of social media. I admire a great deal of social media, but I think I'm here to tell you that the genius of that Volvo ad can't be accomplished by a social media campaign. So let's look at this anthropologically. What we're looking here is at a systematic process of meaning transfer. What's happening is the agency goes to our culture and looks at fathers and daughters and the moments that take place between them, looks especially at, those what are the moments that most endear daughters to fathers? It's when they're in the back seat chattering away to themselves. It's that wonderful moment when he closes the door and he doesn't want to interrupt this flow of nonsense, and he looks into her through the rearview mirror and he has that little smile. It's beautifully underplayed, this piece, not a great cheesy smile. It's this quiet kind of, we get to see his pleasure in this moment. So what happens is the agency, represented by this middle panel, goes to culture, finds the notion of safety, finds a skin, finds a guise, finds a form for safety, and then invests that safety in the notion of the brand. And so that Volvo, the brand, now takes on this notion of safety. So to step up one level of generality, what we're looking at here in the meaning transfer model is looking at the agency extracting value from culture, transferring this value from the culture to the brand, and in the brand case, we now see the brand taking on value. Just to put this a little more generally, we're looking at culture as the source of the meanings that will end up in the brand. And we're looking at the ad agency as the instrument by which this meaning moves from culture to the brand. So to go back to, there's that moment in Chuck's presentation where he said, creativity, and he kind of waved his hands in the air, like, who knows how this works. And I'm not prepared to say what it is, because this is the kind of the voodoo magic you do so well kind of thing. This is where the agency typically shuts the client out of the room and says, leave it to us. And then very smart, very creative people commune with their gods and come up with a notion of Rosie. And if we let the agency get away with it, they will mystify what is, culturally speaking, anthropologically speaking, pretty straightforward process. And I think social media got to threaten the citadel called advertising, the citadel called Madison Avenue, with displacement, and maybe something worse than displacement, because the agency wasn't very good at telling its own story. So the basics, as I understand them, is that the 30-second spot is the preeminent way we make meanings for the brand. And that social media can't ever, at least as it's now constituted, as we now know how to work it, it can never do what the ad and the agency does. So I think a kind of restoration is called for. So just to conclude then, again to say, I'm not repudiating social media. I'm just saying we have to acknowledge its limits. And I think we have to bring back old media and the traditional way in which the agency engaged with the world, if we want to continue to have that ability to build brands and to create that value in the product, in the brand, for which consumers are prepared to pay real increments, right? This construction of brand, meaning we all know, is the way all of us keep out of the commodity basement. So it's an essential piece of, we say products come out of the factory, but they're not finished until the marketers, and especially the ad agency, complete the product with the investment of these cultural meanings. That's what makes this stuff live for the consumer. And what makes those meanings work is the ad agency, not the social media campaign. Very good. Okay, so that's my wee presentation. Please, if you have thoughts and comments, will you send me... Will you send them to me, please? And now I'm going to ask if Michele, Kim, and Christa would join me on stage. So Kim is in the middle. Kim Feil is the a VP and CMO at Walgreens. Thank you for coming, Kim. And Christa, yes, is the VP and CMO of Xerox. Thank you for joining us. And Michele is the SVP and Global CMO of Hershey. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to get things started then. And I guess what I'll do is just ask each of you, and perhaps we'll begin with you, Christa, if we could, for thoughts and comments.
Just in general?
Yeah. Well, we gave you a question, yes. And if you wish, we could go right after the question, but please.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming from a B2B perspective,
Indeed.
So it's been fascinating sitting here listening to the past couple of presentations, which have had a bit more of a consumer focus. So I'll bring to you some thoughts on the B2B world. And culture, of course, is very important to everything that we do, not only in our own personal lives, but also in the work life, which is what Xerox addresses. We don't talk about it as much as culture as we do relevance in the workplace, and how our brand can become more relevant in the way that people get real work done in a pretty chaotic marketplace these days. So I think they're probably very analogous in the discussion, but a lot of what we're doing right now is focusing in on how can we ensure that the Xerox brand has more relevancy as people are going to work each day.
I did a project a couple of years ago for IBM, and it was a B2B proposition, and the question was, how does IBM create a relationship with the client, someone like Target, for instance, so powerful and so strong that it withstands a moment of crisis when the machines are down and Target can't get its cash registers open, and the corporation suddenly trembles on the edge of insolvency. What makes the IBM brand work in those cases? And very interesting to see, whether you have you built relationships, right, and how have you built those relationships, and do they now contain enough value that as this clock is spinning down to a negative relationship, you can tell us, would you, how you use this notion of relevance in a particular way? Can you give us an example?
Sure. Well, I should say a quick sidebar to that. Xerox has always been and continues to be an innovation company. So we take innovation very seriously to the point where we do have sociologists and anthropologists on staff who go in and sit and look and analyze how work gets done in the workplace. So, they could be sitting next to me, they could be sitting next to any of your colleagues, following you around in a workday and seeing how workflow happens, what are the barriers, what are the frustrations, and then we go back to the lab and really, factor in that information as we're developing new products and services. And so one example that would come to life, and this is several years ago, but I think everybody could relate to it in the workplace, is that we used to have printers sitting on all of our desks, and then you would have the copier in the corner, and you'd also have the color printer that would have padlocks around it because only certain people are allowed to print color because it's perceived to be expensive. You'd have fax machines, and then all of a sudden we learned how to scan, so now you had scanners. And while the technology was great, it was also creating a lot more complication in the marketplace and just how you get a simple thing done, like transferring information or putting marks on a piece of paper. So very simplistic in its idea, but Xerox was the first company to then develop the multifunction system where, you know, kind of like the KitchenAid for the office, it can do everything but make your coffee, but you can print, you can copy, you can scan, you can fax, all from one network device. And oh, by the way, you can do it all in color because we've made color more affordable. And now you press one button and you're getting your work done. And a lot of that, what came about as a very simplistic idea, was the result of some of that deep sociological looking at how offices run and what's one of the frustrations in getting work done simply and quickly.
So you're managing the demand chain, to use the language of our first presentation.
In that regard, certainly.
Yeah,
Yep.
Very nice. Excellent.
Yep.
Kim.
Yes.
Thoughts on where we stand in the discussion? Or, please.
Well, I thought I'd build on two areas of some of the things that you said, as well as some that Rick and David had spoken of. You know, we're a 108-year-old company, and when you talk about culture, we've got a culture inside our company, and then we have such ubiquity because we have 7,800 stores within 3 miles of 63% of the U.S. population.
Wow.
So we also have an existing relationship that the consumers who live near our stores have come to expect from us. So in many ways, it's a very nice system. It's very regimented, and everybody knows how to operate the stores, and all the consumers know what to find there. But if we're going to move to a world where all the change that has occurred, especially in these last few years, into a world that makes our 108-year-old reliability something fresh and new and bring new creative ideas to it, we have to tap the cultures we have and look at them through different lenses. And I think you were talking a lot about how you follow and listen to the voices of all the people and try to think of it in a different way. So some of the challenges we've had are, you know, our organization has been successful for 108 years. How do we get them to accept that the same things that brought us this success could be positioned in an even more distinctive and unique way to unlock ideas that would take us to the next 100 years? And how do we train consumers or allow them to experience us in a fresh way without disappointing them?
Yeah.
Because they've become so used to seeing us in a certain way.
That's
And so a fundamental has been a mantra we have internally, which is to kind of move from transactional thinking and transactional excellence and efficiency to engagement and unlocking experiences in our stores. Nothing that is different than what all three of you have been saying, but trying to shift culture internally, and the way consumers have come to expect us has been really intriguing. And so some of the ways we've been doing that is really to do a lot more customer facing in. We are happy that we have consumer trust, and trust is hard for a brand to have, but it only stays relevant as long as you keep bringing them more and more that's relevant to keep that trust going forward. So we've been enlisting our store teams, our community leaders, our consumers, our patients, the people that are in the healthcare world around us, to bring us the ideas that say, we're positioned right there in the community. How can we unlock better health, better well-being, more exciting command of your health and life? Because we've been there as the prescription provider, but we're also there as the last bastion of free healthcare. So there's just a lot we can unlock. But boy, moving that ship from the things that people just believe have always been the foundation into what makes that the next generation of relevant has really been a challenge.
Beautifully put. It feels like we're still, as a culture, operating on a stop-and-go kind of model of adaptation. So we see that we have a problem, and so we put new systems, say, internally in place, and everyone goes, great, okay, that's sorted then. And then it used to be like, well, 5 years before you had to change it again. And of course, now the world changes so quickly that you really have to change it, you know, within a couple of months. And we're not quite there yet. We still have that stop-and-go instinct. And this idea that we are going to be a corporation through which all of this innovation passes, and out of which all of this innovation comes.
And it'll all be process-driven. I love that everybody today has said that creativity isn't a process. It's like just being able to find it and see it and you know, encourage it. But it's hard when you want to get things done, and you got to be transactionally efficient, and all of those things go with it. It's hard.
And I guess part of the art of the deal for marketers is to see how much continuity we can create so that even as there's the world is churning inside and outside the corporation, we there is some sense of familiarity. So people come to shop and they go, this is the place I know, and it has things in the places I expect them to be, and the transaction, yes, it's changing, but no, there are moments there is this piece of continuity that runs through it. It's hard work, man, oh man. And it feels like we're just on the verge of making that change where we'll get good at constant change and working this formula, I think. Thank you.
But it is iterative, to your point. Very iterative.
Yeah, exactly. Michele.
Yes.
Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, so I guess from our vantage point at the Hershey Company, we work in probably a relatively lighter industry even than both pharmacy and Xerox do. And I think for us, a lot of it is about, as I thought about the question of connecting to culture, it struck me how inherent the connection to culture is in a really good consumer insight. So we pride ourselves in saying if we're going to win with consumers, you have to really understand your consumer, you have to understand them, their lifestyle, and how your brand fits into it. So I guess playing on the theme of constancy, I would say there's a real constant stream between that constant consumer insight and understanding and the universal truth that most great brands stand for that really are based in a connection to culture. So if I look at the Hershey brand, for example, which is about bringing sweet moments of Hershey happiness, there's a very inherent connection to culture, which is the family wanting to provide moments of happiness to their kids, or one person wanting to provide happiness, especially in a world where things are getting so much more complicated and complex. And there's just a little simple moment of happiness. And how we continue to, I guess, look at those universal truths of our brands and then keep them connected to culture as culture evolves. So why is happiness important at any different time may shift, but the universal truth of that kind of stays constant.
Yeah.
So that's one place I'd say that we really focus and trying to understand how you connect in those brands to consumers' lives. Likewise, at the point of purchase, when a consumer's shopping, what's important to them, and I guess that goes back to some of what Kim talked about, but as the culture is evolving and certain things are important to consumers, their shopping experience, they want to replicate those things.
Yeah.
They want you to understand how that cultural influence impacts that.
Totally. I think that's really well said. And it feels like, again, as a culture, we're shifting from a notion of happiness that, we used to think about it as something kind of dwelling. That, it would happen at the end of a day when the family was assembled at the table around a fireplace, or everyone was together, and they were kind of settling into the evening. They were dwelling. They were kind of sinking down into they were dwelling in the dwelling of their home, as it were.
Yep.
And now you're right. It's much more episodic, and so it's still happiness, but it gets played out in a different way in the life of the consumer, and staying in touch with that. Staying in touch with both notions, I guess, is an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I think that's our key to that connection back to culture.
Yes.
And likewise, I've seen other great examples of that. I know recently I heard Jim Stengel speak, and he was talking a lot about how they had reinvented the Pampers brand, and by evolving their positioning to just, disposable diapers to a happy, healthy baby, which is kind of that universal truth. But then if you look culturally, how you connect it to culture, in India, initially, women thought that disposable diapers were the lazy way out.
Right.
But when they could really convert that to something that was meaningful in culture, which was about the importance of a healthy brain and really stimulating and making sure your children were going to be successful in life.
Yes.
And how that experience was about letting the baby sleep all night, uninterrupted sleep, helps brain development. That connection to culture unlocks a whole opportunity, and it's really a reframing of what the benefit is.
Totally. There's that lovely moment in Game Changers where Lafley says, A.G. Lafley, then the chairman of P&G, says, listen, at P&G we defined the problem too narrowly. If we were selling toothpaste, we thought about the toothpaste on the brush in the mouth of the consumer at the end of the evening. And in fact, we can't really speak to or for the consumer in the rich new ways we have to unless and he uses a kind of film metaphor for what he thinks should happen. He says, listen, dolly back. Dolly back from that brush in the mouth to the whole consumer, to the evening, the emotional tone of the evening in which the consumer finds herself, to the home, to the community, to the cultural moment. And it feels like that order of richness, which raises we were sitting at lunch talking about pattern recognition as kind of the order of the day. And talking about, you know, how often we're working in an organization that's streaming with change. We're trying to read a culture and a marketplace that's streaming with change. We have all these new bodies of data at our disposal. And it's almost kind of like our value add now increasingly becomes the ability to deliver a kind of pattern recognition. Where we can say, here's the opportunity, a fleeting opportunity, but this is it. And you only kind of get there by climbing to, it's almost, you want to get there by dollying back and going, oh, I see something, there it is. Talking about, and we're talking about organizations that are filled with lots of interesting people who know lots of different stuff, and they're interacting so that they can be the suppliers of intelligence that allows everybody to get to that pattern recognition. There's a special challenge.
I'll offer an example of that we've been going through. You know, many retailers, and us particularly, are very reliant on the Sunday Circular as a very major vehicle for connecting with consumers every week and driving traffic every week. But the Sunday printed circular is in an industry of eroding relevance in terms of regular newspaper subscribership and the use of a newspaper even culturally. You know, we used to lay around all Sunday morning and read the paper, drink our coffee. I don't have Sunday morning free like that anymore, right? So initially, we had a task force looking hard at what's going to happen to the newspapers and what's going to happen to the roto. But back to your pattern, I realized that as we've seen the emergence of new couponing systems, online couponing, social networks like Foursquare check-ins, a whole different set of values and deal connectors to people, I no longer think that the roto will become irrelevant because newspapers are eroding. I think it'll become irrelevant because people can put into their phones what they want, what offers, what retailers, what coupon uniqueness, whatever it is, connectivity they want with retail, they're going to be carrying around in their phone in their pocket. And so it may not end up being an either or, but it isn't just about a coupon strategy and a roto strategy and a loyalty strategy. It's really a whole shift from the way you want your offers brought to you. And if we had left it to the patterns of our teams, we have a group that works on price and a group that works on coupons and a group that works on the Sunday Circular. But we really got all those people together to say, yeah, this is gonna, it's not the papers, it's gonna be how consumers behave differently that's gonna change the fundamentals of the Sunday Circular. So that's now reframed our whole challenge of what we're gonna do and completely reassociated what group is gonna work on it.
Yeah.
So it isn't just people working on newspaper insertion anymore.
Yeah, that's astounding. And we're really starting to test the ability of a corporation. Somebody was just telling me that Deloitte now makes it possible for every single member of that accounting firm to do their own individual contract with Deloitte. They're huge, right? And that's how adaptable they've become, is being able to fine-tune every single relationship. Because people were leaving and they discovered that some people needed Friday afternoons off and were leaving because they couldn't get them. Now they can get them. But that order of responsiveness, and then as you were saying, I mean, you get something changes out there and it changes the form your corporation has to take to be truly responsive. It's a very interesting
Very cross-functional.
Yeah.
Includes technology, includes new applications.
Yeah.
It's a very different solution, but one that will then leapfrog hopefully us to a more competitively advantaged place once we get there.
Totally. It's almost like we're building a great room in the corporation. You know, the great rooms that have taken over American home, and I think, you know, householders built them because they had so little time at home together and they wanted to maximize the exposure they had to one another. And they were living in a just-in-time world, so they wanted to be able to watch TV and make a meal and eat a meal and entertain all at the same, and watch kids and do everything and work at their laptops all at once. And so they created these new spaces in the home that responded to the new structural properties of the American home, the American family. And it's like the corporation is maybe doing some of that as well, so that we have the ability to mobilize, retask people in real time. And it's a very interesting development. I'm chattering too much. Can we solicit questions from the floor? Please, if someone has a question.
No, I think we're watching an interesting nuance in what we all talked about, and we all come from very different companies, and even based on what the speaker before was chatting about, and it's this notion of simplicity. So whether it's providing a simple pleasure, a simple form of entertainment, or a simple act of sweetness from Hershey, or a simpler retailing experience, and in our perspective, it's just making your workday be that much simpler. So you don't even have to think about it, right? You shouldn't have the frustrations of getting basic paper processing or document processing done as a challenge in the workplace, but we often step back and are so impressed with what IBM has done with their Smarter Planet campaign, but we've kind of taken a different approach and said we're all about seeing if we can create a simpler planet, and even if making your work life that much simpler, hopefully that will help your day be much more productive and efficient. And I think that too is kind of touching on what we're all feeling right now in this world of information overload.
Totally.
And it's simple is hard, isn't it?
Yeah, simple. I mean, it's a complex world.
Yes.
Because simple can be very superficial and therefore not competitively distinguishing. So being able to get the right ideas, boiled down into something that's still simple but is really creating distance between your company or your brand and another is, it's never easy, but taking the time to get to that is worth it.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's actually two divergent things going on there. The technology piece, I think, is complex to sift through and sort out and make simple for people, and that's clearly, obviously, one cultural phenomenon that's impacting everything we do. But then there's another piece that I'd say is almost another back to simplicity, which is consumers really caring about a purpose of a brand and about a company, which provides a kind of an anchor, a point of focus, and somewhat simplicity to stay focused around. So it's kind of interesting how divergent it's gone from simplicity on one front like that, and then the technology piece that, frankly, as you talk about looking for patterns of recognition, figuring out how to win using technology across the board, especially in communication with consumers, requires that pattern of recognition.
And that brings us back to one of the issues at issue here is creativity, old models and new models, and what the agency can do for the corporation. And I guess the old model of the agency very often was, we'll collect some data and you'll give us a brief, and then we disappear and we come back with a campaign. And there is, I guess, some feeling that, in fact, that divorced, what we're looking at here now is a corporation that's in constant play, in constant flow. And so to have somebody come make contact and then disappear to solve the problem actually breaks this new contract, which is you sort of have to be in-house and working with us all the time, because that's how fast we're moving. And then I guess there was some sense of, well, the agency offended on both sides. They would return to their citadel, and they often were not as well connected to the dynamism in the life of the consumer out there, so they're kind of doubly isolated. So I think people looked at social media as a kind of hallelujah kind of opportunity, right? Because it was like, oh great, this is going to make everybody have better streams of data and the opportunity to speak to consumers under the radar of traditional advertising. In some weird way, I think some people treated social media as a way to disintermediate the advertising agency. But just, to ride my own hobby horse here for a second, I think that really throws the baby out with the bathwater, because I think only that agency can probably deliver some of the kinds of meanings we need to have for the brand if we are to be truly responsive to the consumer. I mean, would you please contradict that?
Well, something I think it was that David said earlier is this idea of really understanding the demand chain, and then finding that ideas don't come just from doing TV advertising or doing social even. We've kind of thrown the way we do ideas and work with our agencies completely in a different direction. So once a year before we start our formal planning, we have an agency summit. And the agency summit is a little bit to celebrate what we've done the year before, where each agency kind of showcases their best stuff. But then each agency also brings 3 or 4 big ideas of what we ought to be looking at in the future. And in that summit, everybody gets to see everybody's work, so they see how it connects, and they hear about the new ideas. And then we have, each of our business units has an idea platform. So it's not really a strategy per se, it's an idea platform. So for our retail store, for instance, we have a destination advantage. And that advantage for a shopper is that we are right there in the neighborhood. We're an easy place, but you can get a whole bunch of solutions solved in a really easy place. Now, with that idea platform, any agency for any media type, for any purpose, can constantly bring us ideas to that idea platform. And if they turned out to be best executed via social, then the social agency takes it and romps with it.
Nice.
If it's best handled through a roto promotion, then our print team will take it and romp with it, but they'll always be integrated back to the idea platform. And it's really worked out well because our agencies are also collaborating together with each other, even when we're not in the room. So once they come to the summit, they get sparks of ideas together and they create their own little molecules and go off and work together. Excellent. And it really is, it's just exponentially exploded the way that we get creativity, ideas, and productivity from our agencies.
What was your model there? I mean, was that in-home a model you created for your person?
I'll admit it started as a solution for me because I had, we have pharmacy and retail and specialty and worksite clinics and in-store clinics. Wow. We have a lot of business units. I have about 16 business unit leaders I have to serve. And many of the things we do cut across them, but get executed differently. So the flu shot campaign cuts across all businesses, but they're different in a worksite clinic than in an in-store clinic. So rather than having meetings with all the different agencies for all the different business units doing all these things one at a time, it was much more effective to bring them together and say, okay, we want to stand for prevention, and we're going to be the destination in whatever touch point consumers have for prevention. Now, all the agencies that work on flu figure out how that connects, and then we'll figure out how to execute it by channel later. But instead of creating it from scratch every time. So I just found it turned out to work a lot better. Even the retail store for cough cold ties into flu shots. And we can connect those now better than we were able to before when each business unit was doing their own plans. So it was a little bit of serendipity, but it has worked out so well, and everybody gets so excited working together that it's been a real positive for us.
That's fabulous. That's really fabulous.
You mentioned earlier something about the role of the agency and, with consumers taking more control, how does all of that work? And I guess it's been interesting for me to watch because I definitely I'm a proponent that with consumers taking more control, it's even more important, the work that we do to make sure that we steer the brand where we want it to go. But it's been interesting looking at the industry and seeing how many large companies have gone out and walked away from some very long-standing agency relationships and really decided to go with either boutique firms or much more creative kind of mid-sized firms to really bring in fresh thinking and carve out their new space. I actually think the competition for great ideas has gotten stronger as a result of consumers getting involved themselves and taking control and saying what they think your brand means to you.
Yeah, totally. And I think, did you work at Frito-Lay?
I did.
And I was talking to somebody there.
With
I won't
Kim
use his name.
years ago.
Yes, I thought so. Yeah, a few people. And he said to me, listen, we're just going to cherry pick the best people from the best agencies, and we just want to talk to them, and the rest of the agency has to disappear for our purposes. And those people have to be absolutely responsive to. So yeah, there are some very interesting changes here. So listen, I'm being told that we're running out of time. So unless there are questions from the floor, and please do sing out. Let's call it a day. Thank you for your attention. That was great. That was just